What's good, Color Commentary family? It is your host, Marcus Lloyd, telling you that you are in Color Commentary. Colorful conversations by colorful people about Christianity, culture, and race. And with me, as always, in the studio, Mr. Antwuan Malone. What's going on, Antwuan?
Hey, good evening, good morning, good day to you, Mr. Color Commentary listener, Mr. and Mrs. Color Commentary listener.
Yes, very good. Always good to have all the peoples represented in the Color Commentary family. On this beautiful day that we've got here, that we're recording. Excited to get in here with you, Antwuan. Is everything good in your world over there for the listeners? I know they're asking. They're like, I wonder how Grantwan is doing these days.
Grantwan is
give us a little update
on. You know what? I should have known we were gonna do that. I could pop up some pictures. I don't have it where I could pop it up quickly for the video people, but good. Babies are doing well. Mommy's doing a lot better than she was. She had some issues last few weeks, last few months.
Right.
And I think she is now headed again in the right direction. So excited about that. They're still far away though. They're not in our local Dallas area. And so I don't get to see them nearly as much as I want to.
Right.
But I get a lot of pictures and videos, and so that's really cool. So it's crazy to think, Marcus, they will be 1 year old in August. In August, does not feel far away. Like August 30th, I guess it's September, but that doesn't feel far away, man. Before I know it, they'll be 1 year old. That's crazy.
Yeah, that is. It is crazy, and I don't know. It's just crazy to think about, how quickly life continues to change, and you got grandkids. My oldest is graduating high school. Just got an award the other day. I'm gonna brag on him. He got the Mr. School. I'll give this. I'm not gonna tell the school where he is, but
Mr. Like, fill in the blank school.
Mr. Fill in this blank high school, which was a great honor. I mean, it was all his teachers and administrators kind of voting for what they said, and they said we're giving the award to this person who we feel has made the most impact on the school in their time here. That's all I caught, because once I heard all that, I didn't immediately think it was my son, right? Because he's not like he's not in everything, you know what I mean? Like, he's not spread around in all the different things. And so I was just thinking they're going to give it to some kid, spread around and all the stuff. So I wasn't really listening full out. And he was saying the same thing, because I was like, hey, why did they give you that award? He goes, you know what? I wasn't even listening to the intro, Dad. I don't know why I got that award.
He's like, I don't even know.
In it either. So when his name got announced, we went crazy. You know what I mean? Really excited to see that. Proud of him for that. You know what I mean? He started off. I was talking to him afterwards, like, man, you come a long way, right? Like, you came from you probably remember, Antwuan, like biting kids in kindergarten, being sent to the principal's office for talking in class, and now he's getting one of the top awards.
School. Yeah.
So
hey, that's a shout out to Deuce, man.
Yeah,
that's what's up, man. That is what's up. That's cool to hear, man. I bet that made him feel good, especially if it's a surprise like that. Yeah. Like, you really don't expect your name to be called. Those are the best ones for sure.
Yeah, I was mad that they didn't tell us, right?
They should have told y'all ahead of time. Yeah,
we got like half videos of it, because we're screaming. I'm like, oh, I gotta get the video.
Yeah.
So we weren't ready. You know what I mean? So I wish they had like hollered at us and let us know that it was coming.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I almost missed it. I was like, oh, senior awards. I don't know. We already know what awards he's getting, and keep it moving. But you don't miss nothing this senior year. So it's I'm glad
you're able to be there too, man.
But traveling or anything like that, because it was a good, exciting time. It's good stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, man. Today I got to go to this kind of week-long organizing training, and the word that kind of kept coming up in that training is one that I know you and I have kind of went back and forth on a lot, and as you would probably say, it's a pretty popular word these days, but it's the word power. And when you're talking about power and organizing, the idea and the definition of power is the ability to act, right? It's the ability to make change. And when you're organizing, you always talk about organizing people and organizing money so that you can create power to be able to make change, right, in your community and things of that nature. So I thought it might be fun to kind of just talk about that word power, because obviously so much of what we're experiencing even right now in our day and time. There's this wrestle with this word. You know what I mean? I mean, have you felt that wrestle with this word power?
100%. It feels like with with the latest presidency or election cycle that power has been a tool of choice, and it's just been the arena around which culture seems to be wrestling the most. It feels like, I mean, you are always wrestling with power dynamics, and that's not a new thing.
Sure.
It just feels louder or more focused than it ever has. And so, yeah, you're right. I think power is one of those words that, or dynamics, that's really affecting our society at a in a wide range. Again, that's not excuse me, saying those words are like, of course, power always affects us, but it feels more though. It feels like this is just like, what are we going to do with power? And I think the question may even be, what do we do when power is misused or mishandled, or who should have it? And a whole series of things around the topic of power that I think many of us are still wrestling with.
So like, do you think power is good? Is it bad?
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like, how do we?
I mean, I think power is. I mean, I know it seems like a cop out, but it's the, it's the knife that can kill or heal, or be used in a surgery or used to murder. I think it's a neutral weapon. I think it's an inevitable dynamic in a socialized sinful world. Actually, even in a non-sinful world, power is a dynamic. So I think it's I think it is. It's just a force that we have to deal with. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's good or bad at this moment. I don't know where's your head in on that.
Yeah, I think again, I think we talk about it here quite a bit. Like, it can easily become sort of this, you know, way in which you're constantly dividing things into one or the other. You know what I mean? But I think there's nuance here, to the point I think you're talking about. Power has the ability, as you said, to do some really great things, and it has the ability to do some things that are really harmful. I think about it in terms of like, so let's just take it in terms of like a biblical explanation, our biblical space, right? Like, I was talking to you not too long ago about just re-looking at the passage or the story of Moses, and really starting to look at really the first couple of verses, if you will, of Moses, of the story of Moses in Exodus. I think growing up, we didn't really spend a lot of time. If we talked about power, or if we talked about the story of Moses, we talked about the power of God, because we talked about like the plagues, you know what I mean? And God has this ability to use his power to bring sort of discipline and destruction, even, if you will, to the earth. But we never talked about kind of the front part of the creation of the system that led to the need for God to bring down this power on Egypt. Right. So, you know what I mean? Like, at the beginning of Exodus, we've got like this new Pharaoh that comes in, and he doesn't remember Joseph and the deal they had with that. And all of a sudden he's looking up and he sees this group of people who are not like him, who are growing in number. Right. And so he creates these policies, if you will, for population control, right? Killing the firstborns, enslaving people. And so it's a system in which the people in power are creating systems to control others in a way that is oppressive. And so that's a use of power in a system that's destructive and hurtful. But then I think about also, if you continue in that story, I think about, yes, the political structure has been made. People are along for the ride in this, except for those who are being oppressed, until you get to these midwives that we hear about, Shifra and Puah, who decide, even though they've been told by the leadership, if you will, to kill the firstborns when they go to deliver in the Israelites. They decide they're not going to do that, right? They're like, that's not what we don't think that's the right way to do it, and so they decide not to do it, and ultimately use their personal power, if you will, to kind of disobey, civil disobedience against that sort of larger systemic power. Now, that's not necessarily the gaining of power, but it's an exercise of power that they had. They had authority to go and to do something with these children, and they decide not to. So that's an exercise of power. But then if you keep going through the story, right, you've got Moses who, he eventually gets taken into the palace, and he gets older, and he sees, later he sees his people getting beat, and he kills one of the guards, and then he's got to flee, and he's got to go to Midian, and he's all this stuff. And then later he comes back ultimately, and he brings this power of God, if you will, to the space. But so I'm just kind of wrestling with the idea of use of what power he had, Moses, and even the gathering, if you will, of the Israelites as a whole, as a group that Moses is representing, and goes to try to influence the powers that be to do different things, to release the Israelites. And so there's a use of power there that's to free people as opposed to enslave and oppress. So that's kind of where my brain is around. Yes, it's a double-edged sword. You got it. It could be used to do horrible things or used to do good things. So that's just a way of thinking about it right now, but also trying to translate that. How do we use that? What do we do with that in our current environment?
Yeah, it's really interesting because you brought up something that I hadn't thought about recently, which is that it was crowd control. Like the Egyptians were outnumbered. And so you have this majority minority thing going on, and that the power, this is a little bit of an aside of what you were saying, but what caught me was the slavery of the Israelites was the mechanism to keep the minority power, to keep the minority of the Egyptians in power in that region, because the Egyptians were, again, he's like, there's too many of them, and so the only way, to keep them from taking over our stuff, is to subject them to a kind of, as opposed to some other kind of imagination, especially if you step outside of just the biblical narrative of what God wants to do with Israel and just think population. Fear and power seem to be the recipe for the kind of oppression, depression, devaluing of human life that we see in the Pharaoh. You'd almost have to say, man, what would it have been? How would it have been different if the imagination of the Pharaoh were different? That if what he imagined was true about the people present in his country, the outnumbering, if you will, of the native Egyptians, what if his imagination was different than that and was not fear driven, but was some other thing? And what effect does that have to the story? And in what way does he use his power in a more constructive way instead of destructive way? Because I think we're seeing some of that in our modern moment, where the quote unquote Native American, wait, I can't say Native American. That's not what I was thinking. I'm not thinking the Native American. I'm thinking like the white persons who see themselves as Americans.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
So white America, who would call themselves Americans.
Right.
Those persons are the ones that are saying that the population control, we're quickly becoming the minority, and there's fear connected to that power of racism that is driving a lot of what we see today.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, right? Because you're starting to now. I think that's we see this thing that happened with Pharaoh, and what we understand is that this is a cycle. This is a system that keeps recycling itself, and so we see it in our origin stories of America altogether, right? There's a sense of these entities, these people who are overpowering, overpopulating areas, and so all of a sudden a type of power has to be used to control them, to exploit them, to annihilate them, to abandon them, to assimilate them, whatever that may be. But it's fear that's driving a lot of that. right? And even, I mean, if you go back to the 3/5 clause that was created around African Americans, or if you will, right? What was the fear? The fear was that the South would have more power because they had more people, because they had more slaves. And so to try to even out that power, they're like, oh, we're going to count them as 3/5. That way they don't get as much power. And so power is a huge part of the American story. And even playing out today. I mean, again, this is the reason why we're having this conversation, is because there is this vying for power that's constantly going on. That's and we'll probably talk maybe in another show about some things that are going on very specifically. I just want to kind of unpack this conversation of power, period, particularly from a biblical and a church sense, because what I see in our country right now is I see the church utilizing power and utilizing, in some ways, unity around Christ as a part of creating power to preserve a system and a nation, as opposed to, if I can say it from my perspective, to preserve the actual name of God. They're using God, the unity of Christ, to preserve a man-made entity of the United States. And so, and out of, and I'm
well, and a very particular kind of United States. Like, they have a very particular picture of their head of what the true United States is, right?
Yeah, and maybe, and again, I would imagine Pharaoh had the same idea, right? Like, he looks out on the Israelites, the Hebrews there, and he's saying, these cats don't look like us. They're getting bigger than we are. We need to do some labor exploitation here to maybe manage them. The same conversation seems to be happening in America around brown people, immigrants, even
anyone not white.
Anyone not white, right? Now, again, so the thing about it, right? Like, they're not going to call it. There are some people in the very far ends of this conversation who are absolutely being as open as possible to say that we want to make sure that we preserve white America. There's absolutely that. And the sad part is there's Christians who are in that group as well. But if I was to be charitable to some of the Christians that I know who would say that they're not about that, but they really want America to stay American, there's still a place in there that they see that the use of power, whether through policy or or pain, right, that they see that is a necessary thing that needs to happen for our nation and for their safety to be maintained. Is that true? I mean,
yes. I mean, and it's coming out in subtle or subconscious, maybe, if I'm like to the point of being charitable, right? Like, it's not always racialized language. What we're talking about is a way of life. That phraseology is what I hear more. Like, this is the way of life. This is the lifestyle. This is what a way of life is for Americans. So that's why, when you think about what's truly American and they pull up a cowboy wrestling up cows, there's something about that quote unquote way of life that feels distinctly quote unquote American, which again, we could go through and even detangle some of those pictures. But there's something about the way of life, and that way of life is culture. Right. And so I would make the case that white Americans feel like their way of life or their culture is being diluted with the way of life of other quote unquote Americans. And they are non-American in the sense that they are not coming in with an American cultural instinct in every way, in the same way that those who would declare themselves to have an American instinct is. And so they're worried that, we're just going to dilute. I don't want to lose my way of life to these series of new cultures. And so it's not really racism sounds like an attack on a person, right? Hey, I don't like you because your skin is brown or what have you. But this way of life fear is cultural and could be represented not just by brown persons, but by anyone who brings in a culture that isn't a danger to my space, or who is too willing to accept the normalization of a culture that is not my culture. And now you move it into a broader sense of what quote unquote racism and power is. I wish that the Christian church were had better imagination for the power that we have. But I think what we're doing is we're excusing our fear by trying to couple it with Christ, and therefore make it feel like it's a holy battle or holy war, or when in reality it is just fear. And I wish we would just be able to self analyze and be able to state that, and then we can move forward, more honestly.
Yeah, and I look, and you're being even more charitable than I am, because you're saying that there's not these explicit racial terms being used, but there are these dog whistles, right, that are being used, right? There are ways in which people, and this has been a tactic of this sort of move towards power since around the 1970s or so. When you couldn't say the N word over and over again. I can't remember who it was who was the advisor, I think, to Reagan or so.
Yeah,
maybe it was Nixon.
yeah.
But talking about, you can't use the N word anymore, so you use urban, right? You hear those kinds of terminology thrown out, and so I think even the term heritage, right? I think that is because what heritage are you talking about?
Yeah,
right. The heritage is a racial heritage. It is and I'm not going to say racial. It is a racist heritage. It is a heritage that was trying to protect white people in such a way that when you came over with white skin, you got homogenized into this ideology called whiteness. And there were literally overt policies and procedures that were meant to limit the movements of black peoples and brown peoples in America. Right. It was literally how things, like, you can read, it was read into law. We are literally trying to undo laws in the 1960s that are specifically pointed at people because they're not white. And so that's the heritage that people are talking about. And I don't know how you can even separate the heritage or the history of what was going on into a way that you would say, hey, this is just a good part of our history, when the only reason that history even exists is because of the stories of oppression and racism that were at play to conquer a land, right? And even the ways that Christianity was utilized in it, right? That we would come over here, and that in America would be this city on a hill, this scriptural language to talk about how people would come over and use Christianity to sort of conquer a space. You think about the doctrine of discovery and all the papal bulls, right, that were created. That's talking about going into lands, and if these folks if they don't know bread and wine, that you need to introduce them to this and conquer them, and that you would own whatever they own, right? That was part of your destiny. And speaking of which, manifest destiny, this move to move the Christian faith across what we know as the United States, move it west, and in the midst of that, really kind of either assimilate or annihilate the natives that were a part of that expansion, and doing it because they were moved by God to do it. And so we're sitting here talking about heritage. That's the heritage of Christianity in terms of the ways that it does its moves, that it does its conquering and creation, if you will, of this soil that we live on right now.
That's really, yeah. And there's a part of that if you're thinking, because culture, heritage, culture, all those things are connected, if not, I'm not quite synonymous, but connected.
I think they're connected, but I wouldn't connect them, honestly, just based on the
you
ways.
You don't connect heritage and culture?
No, I don't. I really don't. I think culture can. I think culture, well, and maybe partly because of this, because I think culture continues to morph and mold itself into the present, and it's identified more in a present sense, where I think heritage has a more historical past piece. So you could say the historical culture of perhaps a place, and so maybe that's what you're connecting. Sort of the heritage is the culture of that place in history.
Yeah, well, because what I'm thinking is like, part of culture is religion.
Sure.
And so if you're going to establish a culture,
yeah,
then you're hoping to establish a religion. And
well,
I think that is
it doesn't have to be an organized religion for culture to exist. I think culture can exist without religion.
Sure. No, they're not necessary, but I'm saying most of the time, if you go to a culture, there's a spiritual element somewhere.
Yeah.
And so where this is useful or helpful to someone who may be malicious, or where this might slip in as a use case for someone who is well-meaning, is I want to establish my culture. My culture is Christian. This is what This is what the white person may say, the white American may say.
Mm-hmm.
And so the presence of these other cultures are an affront with a different set of religions, are an affront not only to my culture, but to my religion. And so now I don't want Muslim. I don't want, I don't want these things present in my city. I don't want mosques. I don't want all that feels, while those are, I would make the case, those are cultural, not quite artifacts, but cultural pictures of cultural representation in a particular city, these various religious entities from a purely religious point of view, these are non-Christian entities and therefore enemies of Christianity. And so it makes it easy for someone to connect the protection of my culture to the protection of my religion to we need to establish this place as a religiously honest space based on my culture, right? And so I think the American experiment made room for religions. There's what the Bill of Rights is. It states that
in statements,
right?
sure, yeah,
In statements, in statements.
Well, and I'll say in
what
reality too, because we do have a lot of religions that exist in this.
we do, right?
So,
But
yeah,
but in
totally.
reality, what was being protected as distinct, what's being communicated as distinctly American is Christianity. And I think that is part of that has created this bridge where Christian nationalism, or in the various forms of that, the various degrees of that, whether you're like deeply Christian nationalist or you just kind of, it's like the Reformed tulip, like you're either
Exactly.
5-point Calvinist or you're one. So whether you're a 5-point Christian nationalist or a 1 or 2-point Christian nationalist, there's something about it that's like, you know what? The connection between what I understand myself and my culture and my way of life to be with Christianity feels both cultural, national, personal, and it becomes this cross section. And then you add fear to that and you add power to that, and you end up with marginalized people who are demonized. And in the demonization, they get to be mistreated. They get to be ousted. They get to be depressed, or like we talked about before, or oppressed. They get to be dehumanized, right? Because now you are an enemy of God and culture, my culture, not just my culture. And I think that's how we end up where we are. And it's got to be the Christian church that comes in and parses out the difference between the use of power from a cultural, from that marriage of culture and religion that we are speaking from, to the kingdom of God, and what culture, what power and love look like from a kingdom point of view. And that's really hard because we have something to lose in that, and we're afraid to lose it.
Yeah, fear seems to be constantly at work in the midst of this conversation. But, and I'll say, and you said something there that I think is part of the other side of the conversation that needs to be talked about too, right? Like you're like, hey, the church has to come in and parse this out. The church has to come in and do X, Y, Z, right? And what we've seen historically is that power doesn't give up power willingly. Right? It doesn't do it.
Right.
And that's the way anything is, right? Like if you are on the bus, right, and you're like the third stop on the bus as a child, right, and you come on the bus and you like coming in there, and you get all the preschoolers on the bus that got on there first, and you start taking people's lunch money and that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like, then you are the powerful person, right? Yeah. But if all of a sudden the preschoolers all go home and they tell their parents that you keep taking their money and whatever, and then you get on the bus and all of a sudden these parents come in and they're like, you need to give that stuff back. Well, you will give it back because the power that has been brought against you is larger than yours, right? Yeah. You can't go up against this parent power, right? Yeah. And so now you relinquish all the things you took in the midst of your power, the ways you did power. Yeah. And so, I think that then becomes, if there's a movement, if you will, of power, that whether it be justified by fear or whatever it is, it's still a move of power to oppress, and use the name of God to do it. The only other power that can actually kind of push that around and kind of divert that or get it to stop, I'm seeing is there's got to be a larger power in the opposite direction. That's the only way it's ever changed around here. You know what I mean?
The only way David beats Goliath is that he has a power greater than Goliath.
That's right. Even though he looks like he doesn't, right?
Even though he looks like he doesn't. Yeah.
Right? And that's always a hard one because you're like, it's the spiritual power that's underneath, right? And there's always, I would imagine, a spiritual power underneath. And you can see that. I guess you could talk about David and Goliath, even when you look at the work of the civil rights movement, right? It's not that there were more people, if you will. It's the power that they wielded in some capacity that really challenged the powers that were authority, right? There's a reason why Dr. King got called into Lyndon B. Johnson's office all the time, right? Because he knew that he had a power to get him out of office. He knew he had the power to stop things that he was doing. In fact, he got called in sometimes so that if he could put his name on things that Lyndon B. Johnson wanted to do so that people would go with Lyndon B. Johnson. So there's this sense of, even though you don't have the positional power, that you can still use a kind of power of the people to move those in positional power to work for the people, right? Mm-hmm. And so from a Christian standpoint, what does it look like then for if we've got a church power that's being wielded in such a way as to preserve America, and in the acts of preserving America, siding with a system that tends to use techniques and policies to oppress particular groups of people and marginalize them? What can Christians do on the opposite side to use, and do we have any power to use?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear what you're thinking on that as well. But it is what I'm going to say sounds passive or more internal, but I think we have to wrestle with the fact that there are going to be some ways to use power with a kingdom lens that is hurtful to us. So one of the things we're thinking through church multiplication. We're thinking of group multiplication. This is an example. We're thinking of group multiplication at our church. And if you're a pastor and you've dealt with small groups, you know that the last thing anyone ever wants to do is multiply their group. They don't even want to use that word. They want to use split. They want to use break. They want to use everything that, their view of it is just negative, right? But the view of discipleship for groups are to multiply. Like we would say that the zenith of spiritual growth is multiplication at every level, including group. And so one of the pushbacks we get back is like, hey, we got to help people deal with the fear of losing their connection in their group if they're going to multiply, right? Mm-hmm. And so we go to move and we say, hey, you're not going to lose anything. You're actually going to gain, or you're not going to, everything will be fine. You're actually not going to lose. And so we're addressing the fear of loss by saying you shouldn't be worried about losing. But what I'm starting to believe is that sometimes that's true, that you should prepare yourselves. I mean, that you should be, that the fear that you have is a lost fear. Like that's not the fear. But other times the fear is actually you are going to lose. And that is where Christ shows up. That it is the whole point of spiritual discipleship and growth and maturity is to get to the place where all things are opened in your hands, and God can take and use whatever out of it and put whatever into it. And that by itself opens yourself to loss. So your fear of loss the answer to that fear can't only be, hey, actually, you won't lose. The answer has to be, you might lose and everything is still okay. God is still on the move. And so for the Christian church, for the Christian white church, if I could go further here, if there's something God is doing in this country to bring people here, let's just keep it pure kingdom. All right. To bring people here to reveal something about himself and invite himself into the cultures that would be represented here. If he's doing that, and in that process, you lose majority and you lose power and you lose voice, that's an acceptable loss from the kingdom point of view, because God is doing something. And I do you a disservice by only preparing you to deal with the change of loss by saying that loss is the boogeyman. It may be true that the loss is a figment of your imagination, but you should be better ready to do the resilient thing and to carry the cross necessary, to do the hard thing, to lose, to surrender, for the sake of the kingdom. And it's that part, I think, that we haven't applied to the political arena. It feels that the political arena is a no loss arena where no surrender is necessary. I'm supposed to win or be where I'm at always. And if the kingdom says I'm losing, quote unquote, then I don't accept that. Surely that's not what God is doing. But what if it is? So I would make the case that all that is to say the church needs to understand resilience and the ability of kingdom-based, spirit-led loss, and to allow the Spirit to help us determine when it is we should fight against spiritual movement, and when we shouldn't, and where we should do those things. Because I'm afraid we're just too afraid to lose, to lose things, to lose stuff. So
Sure.
it's a broader concept, but
So there's what I'm hearing from you is like there's this kind of foundational just understanding of what it looks like if you go and try to, there's just a DNA that needs to be put into the society of an American Christian that losing is not always a bad thing.
It may be a bad thing, but it's the cross you're meant to carry.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Like it could suck. If you're looking at Jesus on the cross, which is obviously the picture,
yeah.
Well, he didn't like it. And you wouldn't go to Jesus and say in the Garden of Gethsemane, you're not gonna go to him and say, hey man, I don't know what you're worried about. God would, it's not gonna be that bad. No, it is gonna be that bad.
Uh-huh.
But you know what I'm saying? Like
but there's something on the other end, right? There's something on the other end.
But there's something, God is doing something, right?
Yeah.
And so and it's our inability to imagine God doing something in the midst of a loss.
And in the midst
of, especially politically.
Yeah, and in the midst of I'm going to use this word sparingly, but I'm going to try to get it just attached to what Jesus was doing. Maybe it makes a connect to what we're talking about. You're losing something in the midst of a right action, right? Like,
was that a righteous action?
Yeah, righteous. Sorry, righteous. Yeah. So what Jesus was doing was aligned with God, and therefore, if he loses, his act is still going to align with what God is desirous to do, right? So it still furthers the mission that God is on. He sacrifices himself, but in his sacrifice, he actually furthers the mission of what God's trying to do.
Right.
So I think that that's something just to kind of keep in front of us in the midst of even talking about what does it look like to have a counter power to those who are acting from if I can say, from a Pharaoh space of fear about the intrusion, if you will, of a majority growing that is not like them. The counter move is to try to do something that is closer to away from the fear of what happens to me, but more of the fear of God, in the sense of not doing what God has asked us to do.
Right. And when and when that doesn't happen, you end up doing worse, right? You end up doing things in God's name that isn't what he's doing, and you create slavery. Right?
Yeah.
You create these unjust laws because your non-negotiable is your benefit, right? And if it's not benefiting me, or if it's hurting me, then it must not be of God. This is where I'll get back where I'm like, the Christian church believes, I believe the white Christian church, certainly the white evangelical sort of MAGA, is hyper conservative, whatever, that particular block of Christian nationalism, that area, right?
Yeah.
The sort of extreme wing. I don't think they can imagine a country in America where they are not the most powerful entity. Like the connection between what God is doing and them being powerful, those things have to be connected. If they aren't powerful, they don't feel like God is in it, and that's a lack of imagination. What if America's put on this planet as a potential soil for evangelism in freedom in a free space, right? And what if it is the most, and you're just talking about imagination, what if the American soil is the most ripe type of soil for evangelistic, I don't want to say most, but is a very evangelistic space because of the freedoms we afford, because of the lifestyle that we have, right? And therefore Christians can freely speak and influence others. And therefore it is a positive for cultures from around the world to come to an American place, experience something that is Christian, if you will. It is not solely American. Of course, this is happening in China and in Africa and all over. God's doing stuff all over the world. But I'm talking about the imagination of the white Christian.
Yeah.
To say the only future I can imagine, the most protected thing I can imagine is my powerful seed.
Yeah.
And my culture. That's the thing that I am most willing to protect, as opposed to an imagination that says God has blessed this land in a very unique way to be an impact in a unique way. What if this is God cashing in the check of that environment that he's created by bringing the people in? There's not an imagination for that. And if the loss of that is that my lifestyle is cheapened a little bit in order to make space, or I become more diluted in order for those cultures to be in my space, I don't have an imagination for that. All I know is that I've lost something now and I must defend myself.
Right.
And I think that's where we are.
No, I think that's really what I like is, what if the definition of America was different? What if the definition of America, for America to fully be America, is that it is a diverse space? Like, that's the definition, as opposed to America is a white Christian nation. What if it's a diverse, free, religious nation? What if we changed? What if that's, what's interesting, I think the framers of the Constitution actually frame it that way, right? But worked it out differently. And I think this is where what you're talking about right now, when we talk about organizing, is trying to figure out what is the self-interest of the people who are doing whatever they're doing, right? If you're going to go to try to change a power system and bringing another power system, the first thing you got to do is you got to try to understand what your opposition's self-interest is, or in some cases, some people say, what is their vision? And you're talking about it, right? There's a way in which they want to be safe. They want to make sure that they don't lose something, those kind of things, right? And if you can somehow identify or help the other side see that the work you're trying to do together, it actually works in their self-interest, then they'll be much more amenable, right, to participate in working together. I think about a lot when my dad was, elected officer down in Houston, and he was talking about the ways in which there was a community in Houston, largely Hispanic community, and they were seeing this large high school dropout rate, right? And they were working with the community college down there called Lone Star, and Lone Star was looking to put some other campuses around the city. And the recommendation, I think my dad and others were like, hey, put it into this community where you're having this large dropout rate, because there's a way in which the local school, this community college, could actually participate, maybe help the schools to create connections and help kids get tutored, or even create connections to those who drop out, or encouragements to get all the way through high school and then pick up trade schools, whatever that is. That putting in this community college could actually be a really advantageous thing for this community. Now, there were lots of other folks who were like, nah, we wanted to go over to this other community that's, largely upper middle class, you know what I mean? That doesn't necessarily need it, but it's a good place. It would look nice. They would be less concerned about, things happening around the campus, that kind of thing, right? But one of the things that I always said, and I was talking to my dad about this, I think at one point, it's like, I think he even said, it's like, what do you think is going to happen with all of these kids that are dropping out of high school? Like, what do you think they're going to do? They can't get a job, but they will try to survive.
Right.
What do you think they're going to do? You think they're just going to stay in their community that doesn't have the resources that they need to survive? No, they're going to go looking for resources. They don't have jobs to be able to do it, but they have hunger to do that. And I know that the gated community feels really safe, but eventually they will come to that gated community looking for the resources that they need to survive. So it's in your best interest, you who are in the gated community that don't want to put that community college over in that other community over there. It is in your best interest to make sure that everybody in your city has the means and the opportunity to make for themselves what they need to survive. Because then if they are satiated, if they are surviving, if their kids are in safe schools, if they're putting food on the table, they don't go looking for it in other places, right? I don't go thinking about robbing my neighbors. I'm not rich, but I've got what I need. My kids have what they need. I've got a good job. I'm able to work. And so I don't have this mindset of I need to go rob people. Imagine if everybody in your city could live like that. Then you would have people like me who maybe will not be in a gated community, but I'm cool hanging out where I am right now. My kids got what I need. I'm sending a kid to college here pretty soon, right? So that's the kind of thing of self-interest. It's like, if I can put it in, even more, what's the word? Not harsh. I'm going to put it in just more serious tones. I've said this for years, and you probably heard me say this, particularly with white folks. If it is true that in about 20 years or less, that we will be majority minority, that the browning of America will happen between 2050, 2042, that's what it'll be. The majority will be non-white people. And you start to think about the origin story of this country and what white people have done to non-white people. To have that non-white people as a majority, yes, I imagine there are people that go, oh my gosh, this is scary. They might do to us what we did. Okay, if you get that, if that's what you're thinking, right, then wouldn't it make more sense to make friends, not enemies? Wouldn't it be in your best self-interest to actually connect with those people and create relationships with those people so that the thing you're fearing won't happen because you will now be in relationship and create safety between you? So that's where I'm thinking the self-interest. And I think that's where I think that there's places in which grabbing people, bringing them together and starting to look across lines and say, okay, what is your self-interest? What is my self-interest? How can we make those things work together for the good of all? I think that that's a way to even begin the move of power, a counter move of power. And Christians should be able to do this just across the Jesus line, right? And particularly in our country, you said it, on the soil. What if we are the place that has the opportunity for the soil, or what if we are the soil that has the opportunity to actually image the Revelation 7:9 church on the earth? Because of our diversity, because we have all tribes, sons, and nations here, we actually get to experience a slice of what it looks like in heaven. What if the self-interest was, let us create together a place where that kind of environment can actually exist? Imagine that, right?
Yeah, that would take a lot of self-denial and self-sacrifice to do that, right? Because to understand it even takes reshaping, like you said, self-interest. Like the way we understand self-interest is safety and riches and wealth and convenience and comfort. And different is different. Different is not those things. Not those. Different is different. Different is not those things all the time. I just wished. Look, there are some parts of we're both grown men, and there's nothing that I'm saying that is being viewed at with this naivete of the way the world works. That's one of the things I get a lot. I get a lot of, Antwuan, it sounds like you're just being naive or idealistic, but you need to understand the way the real world works. And what I'm saying is, if the way we're going to go about business is to concede to the power of the air and not bring the countercultural values of the kingdom to bear because the power of the air is too regular, then what is it that we're actually doing? Of course, I know that power is important. Of course, I know that the person, that the way to change things, I understand the way the world works. I understand that people are self-motivated, and that what I'm hoping for, what I dream of, is a church who can collectively communicate a different normal, a different vision of what normal is in the face of the current normal. You're not acting like that current normal is absent. You're trying to represent something new, a better way, right? And it takes work to do that because the current is strong in the current, in the status quo. And we have been indoctrinated with we have been discipled in Americanism to say that my interests, my profit, my way is the most important thing. And that discipleship has executed very well for millions across the country. That is the way of America. And but it is not the way of the kingdom. So I just want to put it out there, like in a conversation around power and ideologies around power, these things are not being said with a blind eye to the way the world works. This is looking right at that and saying, but what, can we be brave enough, courageous enough to do the different thing? And then that's where you get civil rights movements. And that's when you get revolution, is when you broaden the imagination of the people to say, you don't have to think that way. That's not the only way to go about society. And that's what I'm hoping for. We're currently using our imagination and our power in a fear-driven way that fits right alongside the American discipleship instead of the kingdom discipleship. And that is the part that I wish we would do differently.
Yeah, and we've got opportunity. I love that you're saying like there's a way in which we have to kind of have to gather ourselves to make this happen. You can, again, we're not naive, like, hey, self-interest, whatever. Sometimes you gotta put a little pressure on people. You know what I mean? And use the system that puts pressure on you to put pressure back. And you mentioned the civil rights movement, and I see it in organizations all the time where you gather people of influence and power to coalition together, to almost build power coalitions, right? Where you may say, I was actually talking to a group recently in our area, they're wanting to see some differences and some changes in the ways the city handles early childhood education, right? But people have noticed, right? Like if you're not a part of a preschool program, the amount of words you lose in your life is somewhere around 1 million words. This correlates down the road into a difference of salary differentiations of $100,000 a year differentiations. It also correlates to the lack of ability for people to read and they get behind in school, and then by the age of third grade they get to the point where it's almost that's where they kind of mark the pipeline to prison sort of space as kind of being at the reading level of third graders, right? And so early childhood education is actually a really important aspect of making sure that kids are all learning together and getting people on the same page and learning and growing, right? And what you want advantageously is you want all kids to learn at a really great rate so that they can all do well in school, and then they become, residents and citizens of your city and your country that can contribute and learn, and they can bring all their beautiful gifts and imagination to innovation, all these types of things. Again, self-interest. We're all going down the same road. But there's this group that's trying to get early childhood education more money kind of put into there, and the city doesn't want to do it. So what they've started doing is they've started gathering faith leaders. This is not just Christians, right? Like it is Christian leaders of monstrous churches in their city, also Jewish leaders of large churches or large synagogues. And part of what I was brokering the other day actually was a connection to some of my Muslim friends and their power over there as well, to bring it to that space to now sit down, and those officers, those commissioners that have to kind of make this vote on how much money they want to spend on early childhood education, like that they would come now to a meeting where they see 1,000 people in a space gathered for conversation around this. But what they see on stage is they see another 20 to 30 leaders who represent some of the most powerful religious entities in this community. And they recognize that they not just have this 1,000, but it's kind of like when I lived in Houston, you saw Roach, you knew there were like 10 others, like it counted for 10 others behind the wall, right? So it's the same thing, right? Like if Christians could utilize, I mean, think about where we live. Like we got a church on every corner. Imagine every Christian leader of a church in our city, just the city where we live, deciding that they wanted to coalition together to make sure that the issues that are important to what they believe the image of God sort of treatment of people is if they believe that's important, that they could create enough power just in their coalitioning that they could go to the council, the city council, and go, we want you to do XYZ, and the council's got to do it because they know they're not going to be voted in, right? They know they're going to have to, they're going to lose certain things and have to put stuff on the ballot, and then they'll get the ballot, and the people will move people to vote certain ways on the ballot, and then they won't get. So creating power organizations and creating or organized power, I think, is a really important skill that the church has not really been excited about, and they have an aversion to because of this almost the bad taste in the mouth with the idea of power. And in our current society, when they see how power has been wielded to bring more oppression, then all of a sudden there's those who are in the middle, sort of the moderates, they're like, I don't even want to talk about power. Power is bad, right? And it's like, no, you're just seeing power used badly, and that's what you're doing. But if you were to change it and do the good version, we might be able to push back against some of these things that are really hurting our neighbors. And the differentiation is I think what we said earlier, is this being used because I'm afraid of what's going to happen to me? Or maybe is this used because I'm afraid of what's going to happen to others? You see what I'm saying? Like, there are ways, you know what I mean, in which I don't have to, like, there are people who are out there fighting for our Hispanic brothers and sisters that aren't Hispanic.
They are not Hispanic. Right?
So, which is what civil rights movement was too. It wasn't just black people.
Right.
It was black, it was white, it was Jewish, it was Asian, it was whoever. And that's the kind of thing. If we can get that kind of power together, we can really make some changes. It's just the courage of the Christian leaders to actually step in those places and present themselves as a power entity.
Yeah. The power is inevitable. Like, there is going to be a powerful entity or an authority or an influencer or influential block or whatever. Like, the dynamic of power in our current the dynamic of power is inevitable. So the question is, like, we're back at where we started. Who has it and how would they wield it? And I think we would typically, when we talked about power in the past, I know we probably need to wrap up here, but if we were talking about power in the past, we're talking about the the church using power as just the power playbook.
Yeah, that's right.
Of the American example that we've lived out, as opposed to the power playbook of Christ, which still affected millions of people to this day.
Yeah.
To this day. To now. Rome has impact. It doesn't have power. As far as like the Roman culture, the Rome of history, right? Jesus still has power. Now,
right,
active and moving and grow, and Jesus's way was a better, more long-lasting, impactful way, but his end game was completely different than what Rome's was, and so we got to figure out, whose playbook we're going to use if we're going to use power as the mechanism. And what the end game is. And it is justice. It is loving our neighbor as ourselves at a micro and macro level. What does it mean to do that one-to-one? What does it mean to do that as a society, as a entity of laws, what does it look like to do those things? And that's where the work is. And it's complicated work to do. It's difficult. And but that is why that is the work that's set aside for those who would have it, but it's difficult. And so it's not easy. It's not simple. We've recognized all that. But there's a better way to do it.
Yeah. And the irony, as we kind of think about it, we kind of started in some ways with the story of Moses and Pharaoh. And I think the irony, if I can put it into the American experience, is I grew up in predominantly white spaces when we told the story of Moses, we talked about God using his power to destroy the Egyptians. The irony of that is the Egyptians represent an oppressive power on people who are made in the image of God. They are those who represent those who created political systems that were about exploitation and population control. And so, but the place where God shows up is not to further that protection of self. It's not to further that system, but rather the power of God shows up behind those who are pushing against that system, right? And so it's just, to me, I just kind of sit in the irony of that, right? Because how can you sit in a predominantly white church telling that story and miss the first part of that thing, and how much of the ways American church and American society has existed has been the way Pharaoh has played out. And it should be, if I can say this, perhaps it should be a warning. Right? To us, you know what I mean?
That's why, Marcus, I think that's why the story's there.
Yeah.
That's why we read it.
That's why we read it. We're supposed to get the warning.
Get the warnings, yes, throughout the whole thing. Yes.
So anyway, so look, I love it. This is, again, just kind of wrestling with this idea of power. I think we got to do it. We'll probably have to do it again because it's constantly. In fact, I think there's some ways in which we're seeing power engaged in our society that we may talk about on the next show. But I just wanted to kind of set the stage, if some ways, for that, because I continually, as we're in this system where we are, and in the Christian world, this word power has so many responses, and so I just want to give a chance to kind of wrestle with that a bit. So in the midst of that, I hope this was a good conversation, Antwuan. I'm glad. I know we don't have any guests, and so it's not just us. It is us. You know what I'm saying? It's us.
We here
doing what we would have done while we were playing.
Anyway.
So we might as well get the mics on.
Throw the mics on. Yeah,
that's right. So glad you guys got to sit in our conversation around power and trying to understand that. We hope that was helpful for you, and that it was able to ground you in some of those things that we're thinking about, even over here at not just Color Commentary, but with Threaded altogether. If you haven't checked us out, man, go check us out. wearethreaded.org. It's the entity that powers this podcast. We are on the socials as well. We are Threaded on the Instagram. As we are, I get the underscore different.
Instagram is we_are_threaded, and I think that's right. Yeah. And if it isn't, then just remove the underscore and put it all together. That's right. You got two shots.
But you can find out a little bit about there. And then obviously on our website, there's more resources that we have that are engaging a lot of different conversations and bringing people together on this. So we're glad that you are here, Color Commentary family. And the colored means that we are here to give you different colorful lenses to engage with as you look at different subjects. So we hope you got to do that. And if you did, remember as you leave to then stay colored.